If a Thanksgiving dinner can bury your dignity, it can also dig the grave for an empire. They threw leftovers at me like trash, but I returned the favor with notarized truth. Keep watching. By the end, the one they called scraps will be the one serving the final dessert. And that dessert is justice. I am Eloise Cordova, and I am 29 years old. For 24 of those years, I have been the adopted daughter of the Harrington Vale family, a name that carries the weight of half the foundations in the fictional city of Northbridge. And on this Thanksgiving, my stepmother, Genevieve Harrington, threw a slab of cold, congealed turkey at my chest. The impact was a dull, wet slap that echoed in the sudden, crushing silence of the grand dining room. The entire table, all 24 guests draped in autumn-colored cashmere and heirloom jewelry, went perfectly still. It was as if someone had hit a universal pause button. A heavy silver fork, halfway to a cousin's mouth, froze in midair. The low murmur of polite, meaningless conversation evaporated. All you could hear was the distant clatter of pots from the kitchen and the sound of my own breathing, sharp and controlled. "How dare you?" Genevieve hissed. Her voice was not a shout. It was worse. It was a tight, venomous whisper that cut through the silence like a scalpel. "You wasteful, ungrateful girl." The accusation was for an act of basic decency. I had been seated, as always, at the far end of the table, the seat closest to the swinging kitchen door, the one that caught all the drafts and the angry muttering of the staff. On the sideboard next to me sat a stack of plates, piled high with the day-old, unrefrigerated scraps from last night's prep kitchen, congealed green beans, dry stuffing, and turkey bits that had a sour, off smell. It was the practice food, and it was meant for the trash, but Genevieve insisted it be offered first. When Maria, the head cook, tried to slip past me with a small, fresh plate of her own food, she had nowhere to set it down. I saw her juggling the hot dish, her face grim. Without thinking, I had slid the heavy platter of spoiled leftovers a few inches to the left to make room for her. I had not thrown it out. I had simply moved it. "I was just making space. Genevieve," I said, my voice low. I did not look at her. I looked at the dark, greasy stains spreading across the front of my cream-colored silk blouse. "Making space?" My stepsister, Sloane, let out a short, barking laugh from her seat of honor near the head of the table. She leaned forward, her perfect blonde hair catching the light from the chandelier. "She's always just making space. That's what long-term guests do. Mother, they take up space until you ask them to leave." A long-term guest, not a daughter, not a sister. After 24 years, I was still just a temporary fixture, a piece of furniture they had not yet found the heart to put in storage. The smell hit me then, the heavy, cloying scent of cold gravy, thyme, and refrigerated fat. It was seeping into the fabric, chilling my skin underneath. And with the cold, the memories came, a rapid, sickening slideshow of 24 years of Thanksgivings spent at the end of this table. Me at 7, sitting on a folded telephone book because they forgot my booster seat. Me at 12, picking at a plate of side dishes because Sloane had accidentally taken the last piece of turkey. Me at 19, home from college, being introduced to a business partner as a girl my father took in. Each snapshot was a lesson in insignificance, a careful, curated education in my own worthlessness. Every holiday, every dinner, was a fresh reminder that I was an obligation, not a choice. A heavy sigh broke the tension. It was my uncle, Archer Vale, my adoptive father's brother. He polished his wineglass with a linen napkin, his eyes fixed firmly on the crystal. "Genevieve, please," he murmured, not looking up. "Don't make a scene." It was his catchphrase, the official motto of the Harrington Vale family. It was never, "Don't be cruel." It was never, "Don't be abusive." It was always, "Don't make a scene. Don't disrupt the performance. Don't let the neighbors hear. Don't do anything that might force people like Archer to actually intervene." His cowardice was as predictable as the cranberry sauce. Genevieve ignored him. She was not finished. She snatched her own heavy linen napkin from her lap, dipped it deliberately into her glass of ice water, and threw it. It flew across the 6 feet between us and struck my neck with a wet, cold slap, harder than the turkey, the gravy-soaked napkin. It was a punctuation mark on her cruelty. I flinched, but I did not wipe it away. I sat there, the icy water dripping down my collar, mixing with the grease. I let them look. I let the 24 pairs of eyes bore into me, a gallery of the complicit. And as I sat there, frozen, my eyes dropped to the plate in front of me, the plate I had not yet touched, the plate Genevieve's napkin toss had accidentally nudged aside. Underneath it, where it could not have been before, was a business card. It was thick, expensive cream cardstock, the letters embossed in a severe black font. It was simple, stark. Elijah Rowan, Essek. The name vibrated in my skull. Elijah Rowan, I knew that name. My adoptive grandfather, Edmund Vale, the founder of the Bright Harbor Trust, the patriarch, the only one who ever looked at me with anything other than disappointment or indifference, had mentioned him. Rowan was his private attorney, the one who handled his personal, sensitive matters. Edmund had died 3 weeks ago, a sudden, quiet heart attack that had left the entire family reeling, not from grief, but from the sudden vacuum of power. I stared at the card. How did it get there? It was impossible. Unless it was Maria. When she had set her plate down, had she slipped it there? Had Edmund, knowing his time was short, knowing this family, set one final move in motion? The thought was a spark in the cold, dead quiet of my mind. Before I could even process the card, a new object slid into my peripheral vision. Scraping against the polished mahogany, it was a heavy dark blue leather folder, pushed across the table by Sloane. It stopped just short of my water glass. "While we're all here," Sloane said, her voice bright and dismissive, as if the last 5 minutes had not happened. "We just need you to sign this." I looked at the folder, then at her. Her face was a mask of pleasant impatience. "It's just a formality," she continued, tapping a manicured finger on the cover. "A waiver for the fund. With grandfather gone, Mother is taking over as the primary trustee, and the board just needs to clear the old paperwork. It confirms you waive any further claims. Just sign it. Eloise, let's get this over with." She produced a heavy gold-plated pen and clicked it, placing it deliberately on top of the folder. "Sign it. Sign away my connection to the one man who had shown me kindness. Sign it." While the scraps of their dinner cooled on my chest and the laughter of my stepsister echoed in my ears, they had orchestrated this. The public humiliation, the pressure from the entire table, the quick, clean execution. They thought I was a beaten dog, so broken that I would sign anything just to be excused, just to be allowed to go upstairs and wash the stench of gravy off my skin. For a long moment, I said nothing. I looked at the card from Elijah Rowan, Esca. I looked at the waiver from Sloane. I felt the cold drip of water on my neck. Then, I raised my eyes. I did not look at Sloane. I looked directly at Genevieve, at the head of the table. I did not sign. I did not touch the pen. I let my voice, clear and cold and perfectly steady, cut through the expectant silence. "Tomorrow," I said, my gaze unwavering, "you'll wish you used different ink." A flicker of confusion crossed Genevieve's face. Sloane's smile tightened, her mask cracking for just a second. They did not understand. They had miscalculated. They thought the scene was over. They thought they had won. But I knew something they did not. Someone was going to be leaving this table tonight. Someone was going to be cast out, stripped of their power in their place. And it was not going to be me. The silence in the dining room stretched, becoming thin and brittle. It was no longer the shocked silence of 24 guests. It was the suffocating, heavy quiet of a vault. My words, "You'll wish you used different ink," hung in the air, refusing to dissipate. Genevieve's face, a perfect sculpture of aristocratic disdain, had not moved, only her eyes, a pale, Icy blue, hardened. Sloane, recovering first, let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. More ink? What are you talking about? Are you drunk, Eloise? Just sign the papers. I did not look at her. I looked past them, at the dark, oil-painted portrait of a long-dead Vale ancestor on the far wall. His eyes seemed to follow me, just as their eyes had followed me for 24 years. This was the script. My role was to absorb the humiliation, to apologize for the scene they had created, and to sign the paper. That was the function of the long-term guest. But my entire life here had been a rehearsal for this moment. This dinner was not an anomaly. It was the culmination. I was 5 years old when I was brought to Harrington Hill. I have no memory of the accident itself. Only the smell of rain on hot metal and the fractured reflection of emergency lights in a shard of glass. The newspapers, in the brief, sanitized reports that followed, called the single car crash suspicious. My parents, Elise and Julian Cordova, were gone. I was wreckage, and then I was a transaction. Edmund Vale, the patriarch, the founder of the $50 million Bright Harbor Trust, had demanded I be brought in. He and my father had business, a connection I was too young to understand. Edmund's word was law. So I arrived, a silent, traumatized 5-year-old, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Genevieve, my adoptive father's new wife and Sloane's mother, greeted me not with a hug, but with an appraisal. I was a stain on her perfect social fabric. She never said the words, but her every action screamed them. I was an obligation. She tolerated my presence for the sake of appearances, a testament to the family's manufactured benevolence. The Harrington Hill estate was a testament to that image. It was a sprawling Georgian mansion full of crystal chandeliers that threw rainbows on the walls, silk-covered furniture you must not sit on, and floors polished to such a sheen you could see your own distorted reflection. The house was full of bright, cold, empty spaces. My room was in the north wing, overlooking a patch of dying hydrangeas. It was furnished in cast-offs from other rooms, and it was governed by one absolute, unspoken mandate: silence. I was to be invisible. I was to make no noise, ask for nothing, and occupy the smallest possible space. I look at Sloane now, her expensive, angry face flushed above her pearls. She was the heir. She was born to this. While I was learning to be invisible, she was being groomed for the throne. Our lives were a perfect, cruel parallel. Sloane was given a corner office at Vale Urban Developments, the family's real estate arm, the day she graduated from her Ivy League. Her name was on the letterhead before she had ever seen a balance sheet. I was given a round, scarred plywood table in a 25-square-meter studio downtown, the place I called Arcadia Pixel Lab. It was my design studio, the business I had built from nothing. I had clawed my way into existence with sleepless nights, coding until my eyes burned, taking freelance jobs that paid in fractions, all to build something that was mine, something they could not touch or tarnish. They, of course, found a way to tarnish it. This Thanksgiving dinner, with its ritualized cruelty, was just a holiday version of our weekly Sunday dinners. For 24 years, those meals were my stage, a private, weekly performance of my inadequacy. Genevieve would hold court, detailing Sloane's latest social triumph or a minor success at the firm, inflated to sound like a corporate takeover. Then, inevitably, the spotlight would turn to me, the air thick with performative pity. And Eloise, Genevieve would sigh, is still drawing. The word drawing was delivered like an epitaph, as if I were a child finger-painting in a corner. We are so proud she is trying, she would add, a little smile playing on her lips. It was a command for the rest of the table to murmur their lukewarm encouragement. That's lovely. Dear. My Uncle Archer Vale, the man who signed my adoption papers but never acted as a father, would chime in, clearing his throat. But all that, drawing, it isn't a real business, is it? Not like the trust. When are you going to put that energy into something serious? Join the community outreach board? The Community Outreach Board, the traditional dumping ground for Vale women with too much time and no real power. I look at the leather folder Sloane had pushed at me. The Bright Harbor Trust. The embossed logo gleamed under the chandelier. Real business. I had done real work for them 2 years ago. The Bright Harbor Trust website was a digital dinosaur, a clunky, broken relic from 1999, an embarrassment to a $50 million foundation. Edmund had complained about it. So I fixed it. I spent 4 months of my own time, pulling all-nighters, designing a new, fully integrated portal. I built a secure donation system, a sleek interface for grant applications, and a transparent dashboard for donors. I coded it myself. I presented it to the board. It was 4 months of work I gave them for free, a gesture of goodwill, my gift to Edmund. At the launch gala, an event I had to remind Genevieve's assistant to send me an invitation to, my stepmother took the stage. She thanked the caterers, she thanked the florist, she thanked the valet service. Then, with a dismissive wave toward the back of the ballroom, she said, "And of course, we must thank our technical support team, who worked so hard to get the new site online." I was standing by the service entrance, next to a stack of dirty plates. Technical support. She had erased me. She had taken my architecture, my code, my design, and reduced it to an anonymous IT ticket. I feel the cold napkins still clinging to my neck, the grease from the turkey hardening on my blouse. This is who they are. They do not build. They take. They do not create. They erase. Only one person in this family had ever seen me. My eyes drift to the head of the table, to the chair left conspicuously empty. Edmund's chair. Genevieve and Sloane collected assets. Edmund collected moments. While they filled their vaults, Edmund kept a single, crumpled photo booth strip tucked behind his credit cards in his worn leather wallet. It was me. At 12 years old, I was missing a front tooth. My hair was a mess, and I was grinning so hard my face ached. We were at the Harbor Park Boardwalk, a place Genevieve found common. We had skipped a dull charity luncheon to ride the wooden roller coaster and eat fried dough. He called me his firefly, the only scrap of light in a house full of shadows. He was the only one who asked about my designs, not my drawings. He was the anchor that kept me from drifting away completely. His absence tonight is a physical void. His death 3 weeks ago was not just a loss, it was the removal of my only shield. The last time I heard his voice, it was not the warm, rumbling laugh from the boardwalk. It was a voicemail. It arrived at 2:15 in the morning, just 1 week before his official time of death. His voice was thin, strained, and terrified. "Eloise," he whispered, the sound of fumbling paper in the background. "I'm at the main office. Don't trust the reports. Don't trust Genevieve. The truth, Eloise, the truth about your parents, about the accident, it needs to be told. I've made sure. The line went dead. A week later, he was gone. A sudden, massive coronary, the family spokesperson announced, peaceful, in his sleep. The funeral was immediate, efficient, and cold. Genevieve's personal assistant sent a curt, black-bordered email. The service will be strictly family only, by invitation, to protect their privacy during this difficult time. I was not on the list. I was not family. I watched the live stream from my 25-square-meter apartment, sitting on my second-hand sofa, watching Sloane dab at theatrically dry eyes. The final blow came 2 days later. Another email from the assistant. "Dear Eloise, your presence is not required at the reading of the will tomorrow. Mr. Vale's final arrangements have been handled by his attorneys. Genevieve will be in touch regarding the future of your allowance." My allowance? The meager stipend they sent me. A tax write-off. A leash. They thought they had done it. They had cut the final thread. I was officially, finally, an outsider. The girl they had saved was now just a loose end, easily snipped. They thought the girl sitting at the end of the table, covered in their garbage, was beaten. They thought I was powerless, humiliated into submission, ready to sign their waiver and crawl away. They did not know. I looked down at my plate, at the dark, congealed mess, and next to it, the stark, white rectangle. Elijah Rowan. Esque. They did not know that Rowan had called me the day after the funeral. Bypassing Genevieve's entire firewall of assistants and lawyers, he had called my personal cell, a number only Edmund had. His voice was not warm like Edmund's, it was sharp, like shattered glass. "Ms. Cordova," he had said. No preamble, no condolences. "My name is Elijah Rowan. I was your grandfather's private counsel. Forget any emails you may have received from the family. Mr. Edmund Vale's primary priority was you. We need to meet. It is urgent." I look up from the card. Sloane is holding the gold pen out to me, her patience snapping. "Sign it, Eloise." I finally meet her gaze. I let her see the cold focus in my eyes. I had come to this dinner expecting a performance. I had come prepared for their theater. But I had not expected this. The humiliation, the waiver, the final public execution. And I had not expected the card. I did not know how Maria slipped it to me. But I knew what it was. It was a signal. It was the last message from Edmund. It meant the plan was in motion. I pick up the heavy linen napkin Genevieve had thrown at me. I slowly, deliberately, wipe the grease from my chin. I am not the guest. I am not the scraps. I am the executor. That title. Executor was not a metaphor. It was a fact. My refusal to sign the waiver at the Thanksgiving table was not a spontaneous act of defiance. It was the first move in a game I had been studying for the past 48 hours. The real story did not begin with the throw of a turkey. It began in a dusty third-floor office smelling of old paper, leather bindings, and stale coffee. Elijah Rowan's office was the antithesis of Harrington Hill. There was no crystal, no silk, no polished mahogany, just rows upon rows of beige file binders, a dented metal desk, and a single, buzzing fluorescent light. He had called me the day after the email barring me from the will reading. He was a thin, severe man in a slightly rumpled suit. He did not offer condolences. He offered a key. He turned, inserted it into a massive, old-fashioned black safe behind his desk, and spun the combination dial. The tumblers clicked with a heavy, final sound. The safe door swung open with a pneumatic hiss. He pulled out a single, thick, leather-bound document and a small silver digital audio recorder. He placed the document on the desk between us. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "This," he said, his voice flat, "is the original, executed last will and testament of Edmund Vale, signed, witnessed, and notarized." He gestured to the recorder. "And that is the video and audio recording of the signing, per his instructions, to verify his sound mind and intent. He knew who he was dealing with." I just stared at the document. Genevieve's lawyers said, "They said everything was handled. They said I wasn't required." "They handled their version," Rowan said, sitting down. He tented his fingers. "They did not have this." He slid the document toward me. "Read Article 3. My hands were shaking. I opened the heavy cover. The language was dense, but the names jumped out. I skipped down, my eyes scanning the legalese, until I found it. All remaining assets, properties, and controlling interest of the Bright Harbor Trust, valued at approximately $50 million, I hereby bequeath to my granddaughter, Eloise Cordova, who I name as primary beneficiary and successor trustee. $50 million. I read the sentence again and again, the words blurred. This isn't possible. It's a draft. Edmund would never." "He did," Rowan interrupted, his voice sharp, cutting through my shock. He pressed a button on the digital recorder. A small screen flickered to life. Edmund. He was in this very office, sitting in the chair I was in now. He looked pale, thinner than I had ever seen him, a deep exhaustion in his eyes. But his voice, when he spoke to the camera, was steel. "I, Edmund Vale, on this day, October 12th, declare this to be my last will and testament. I am of sound mind and clear body, and I am making this change free of any duress." He looked directly into the lens, and it felt as if he were looking at me. "I am naming Eloise Cordova as my successor. She is the only one who embodies the original spirit of the trust. She is the only one I can rely on to protect it from the internal rot, from the greed of those who see charity as a veil for their own vanity. Eloise will protect the community. She will protect my legacy." The video ended. Rowan switched it off. I could not breathe. "But, Genevieve, Sloane, they would never let this stand. They had their own lawyers." "Oh, they tried," Rowan said, a flicker of something almost resembling a smile crossing his face. "They moved with impressive speed. The day after the funeral, they produced their own amendment." He pulled a different, thinner file from a drawer. "This is their version. Signed by Edmund, dated just 3 days before his death. It names Genevieve as the sole successor trustee and Sloane as her alternate. It relegates you to a continued stipend at the discretion of the trustee. It's the document they are currently presenting to the bank." My stomach dropped. "Then it's over. He signed it. They won." "No," Rowan said, tapping the original, thick will. "They were hasty. Genevieve has always underestimated you, Ms. Cordova. She saw you as an emotional child, not a legal entity. She and her high-priced, arrogant lawyers missed Article 4, Section B." He flipped to the page. "The trigger clause. Edmund and I inserted this 5 years ago." He read the clause aloud. "In the event of any and all amendments, codicils, or alterations to the structure of the Bright Harbor Trust, such changes made after the primary beneficiary, Eloise Cordova, reaches the age of 28 years, are hereby rendered null and void unless explicitly co-signed and agreed to by the aforementioned beneficiary, Eloise Cordova." Rowan looked up at me, his eyes sharp. "You turned 29 2 months ago, Ms. Cordova. That amendment they are waving around?" He tapped the thin file. "It is legally irrelevant. It is expensive toilet paper. The original will, the one you are holding, is the only one that stands." I sat back, the air rushing from my lungs. The waiver. The document Sloane had just pushed at me at the Thanksgiving table. It was not a formality. It was not clearing old paperwork. It was a desperate, panicked attempt to get my signature now, to retroactively validate their void amendment, to trick me into signing away the power I did not even know I had. "Genevieve doesn't know about this clause," Rowan continued. "She only has the copy of the will Edmund kept in the home safe, which he conveniently updated with her version, knowing it was worthless. She doesn't know about this copy. She doesn't know about the trigger. She just knows the bank is hesitating." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I contacted the bank's fiduciary department the moment I learned of Edmund's death. I presented the original will and the trigger clause. They have, as of yesterday morning, put a temporary freeze on all major outlays from the trust. Pending a full legal verification of the rightful trustee, Genevieve is locked out. She is hemorrhaging money and, more importantly, social capital. She is desperate. She thinks you are the only obstacle, but she thinks you are an obstacle she can bully." He closed the will and pushed a small, encrypted USB flash drive across the desk. "This is why he was afraid," Rowan said, his voice dropping. "This is what he was doing in his last few weeks. This is what they are truly afraid of. Edmund wasn't just protecting your inheritance. He was documenting their crimes." He gave me his instructions. Simple. "They are having their annual Thanksgiving performance tomorrow night. They will, undoubtedly, try to corner you. They will try to humiliate you into signing that waiver. Let them go to the dinner. Let them play their hand. Let them bury themselves." I spent the next 24 hours in a fugue state. I left Rowan's office. My world tilted on its axis. I went not to my apartment, but to a small, quiet coffee shop downtown, Maple and Ink. I put in my headphones, plugged the USB into my laptop, and entered the password Edmund had given me. It was not just spreadsheets. It was audio files, scanned invoices, hidden bank ledgers. My fear, The cold, ambient anxiety that had been my companion for 24 years began to sharpen. It crystallized. It turned into a fine, hard, diamond edge. It turned into a bold, black line. I listened to Edmund's secret recordings. I heard him arguing with Archer Vale, my uncle, about the North Docks renovation project. The invoices are triple the estimate. Archer! Edmund's voice was strained, angry. Triple, and not a single pile has been driven. Genevieve is handling the vendors. Archer's voice was oily, nervous. It's standard practice. Edmund, these things, they have overages. This isn't an overage, it's theft. I clicked to the next file, a spreadsheet. My design-trained eyes saw the pattern immediately. It was a classic circular funding scheme. Money left the Bright Harbor Trust, allocated for the North Docks. It went to a consulting firm I had never heard of. From that firm, it was broken apart, sent to 3 other ghost contractors for materials and labor that never existed, and then percentages of that money, 20% here, 30% there, cycled back, landing in the accounts of shell companies. Shell companies I recognized. They were the same names on the letterhead for Sloan's boutique development projects. They were not just erasing me. They were gutting his legacy. They were stealing from the homeless shelters, the after-school programs, the community legal aid centers that the trust was built to support. They were using Edmund's $50 million gift to the city as their personal slush fund. And then I heard it, a small, tinny audio file, a call with a contractor, Genevieve's voice. I don't care about the estimate, she was saying. You will bill the trust for the full amount. The full amount. The paperwork must be clean. My daughter's projects depend on this liquidity. Are we clear? Clear. It was all perfectly, horrifyingly clear. My fear was gone. In its place was a cold, pure, vibrating certainty. This was not just about me. It was not about the money, or the name, or the seat at the table. It was about the truth of my parents' suspicious accident. It was about Edmund's sudden heart attack. It was about the North Docks. It was about every dollar they had stolen from people who had nothing. I closed the laptop. My plan formed, not as a vague idea, but as a finished blueprint. Genevieve wanted a private, papered-over transaction. She wanted to use a public holiday to execute a quiet legal assassination. I would give her the opposite. I would take her weapon, public appearance, and turn it against her. They had built their empire on a foundation of public perception. I would bring it all down in the bright, unforgiving light of that same public. I put the USB in my pocket. I looked at the time. I was due at Harrington Hill for Thanksgiving dinner. I was due for my final performance as the long-term guest. And as I sat there at the table, the gravy cooling on my chest, Sloan pushing that worthless waiver at me, I was not the victim. I was a witness. They thought they were setting a trap. They had no idea they were the ones who had been caught. I left Harrington Hill 20 minutes after my final statement. I did not wait for dessert. I did not excuse myself. I stood up from the table, the congealed napkin falling from my lap, and walked out of the dining room. I did not run. I walked, my back straight, feeling the 24 pairs of eyes on me, hearing the stunned, absolute silence I left in my wake. I retrieved my thin coat from the hall closet, walked out the heavy front door, and did not look back. The drive to my apartment was a blur. I washed the cold grease and dried gravy from my skin in my tiny, fiberglass shower stall. I scrubbed my face until it was raw. I put on my oldest, softest pajamas and made a cup of cheap peppermint tea. I sat on my lumpy secondhand sofa in my 25-square-meter apartment. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place in the world that was entirely mine. At exactly 11 o'clock at night, the ancient buzzer on my wall screamed. The sound was so violent, so out of place in the quiet of my building, that I almost dropped my mug. No one ever came here. No one from that world even knew where I lived. I pressed the intercom button. Who is it? A voice, tight and imperious, cracked through the small speaker. Eloise, let me in. It's Genevieve. My blood went cold, not from fear, from a sudden, sharp clarity. The next move. It was happening faster than I expected. I buzzed her in. I stood in the center of my small room, waiting. I did not bother to hide the chip in the rim of my ceramic mug. I did not straighten the faded quilt on my bed. The knock on my apartment door, number 4B, was not a knock. It was a summons, a hard, rapid pounding. I opened it. Genevieve Harrington stood in the dim, flickering hallway light. She was still in her Thanksgiving dinner suit, a ridiculously expensive silk tweed, but it was rumpled. I had never, in 24 years, seen her look rumpled. Her perfect, helmet-like hair was slightly askew, as if she had been raking her hands through it. Her mascara, usually flawless, had left faint, smudged tracks at the corners of her eyes. She looked rattled. She looked, for the first time in her life, like she had lost control. She did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me into the room, then stopped dead, her eyes widening in genuine, undisguised horror. She was taking it all in. The scarred-up kitchenette, the small desk where Arcadia Pixel Lab had been born, the single window that looked out onto a brick wall. This was where I lived. The physical evidence of my separateness, my commonness, was an assault on her. "There has been," she began, her voice strained, refusing to look at me, "a profound misunderstanding." Her eyes darted around the room, looking for a place to settle, and finding none. They avoided the chipped mug in my hand. They avoided my face. The papers Sloane presented? It was a formality, as she said, a legal necessity to protect the trust's future. I said nothing. I walked to my small kettle, which was still warm, and poured more hot water over my tea bag. I did not have a second mug that was not chipped. I pushed my own, the one I had been drinking from, across the small coffee table toward her. She stared at the chipped rim as if I had offered her poison. She did not sit. "Eloise," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of forced, strained intimacy that she had never used with me before. "We know you. You feel you have been slighted. Edmund was fond of you, and we are prepared to honor that fondness." I sipped my tea. The silence in the room was absolute. It was my silence, in my space. She was the one who had to fill it. "We are prepared to offer you $5 million, she said, the words coming out in a rush. "A clean break. You sign the waiver, relinquishing any claims, and the money is yours. You can buy a dozen places like this. You can travel. You will never have to worry about drawing again." $5 million. It was a number she believed was beyond my comprehension. It was the sum she thought would buy my silence, my signature, and my permanent disappearance. I did not speak. I just looked at her, my face calm, and pushed the chipped mug an inch closer. Her eyes flickered to it, then away. "Eloise, this is an incredibly generous—" The door to my apartment, which I had not fully closed, was pushed open again. Sloane. She strode in, bringing a blast of cold air and the overwhelmingly expensive scent of her perfume. She, too, was still in her dinner clothes. Her face was not rumpled. It was a hard, angry mask. She was holding the same blue leather folder from dinner. "Mother, you're doing this all wrong," Sloane snapped, brushing past Genevieve. She threw the folder onto my coffee table. It landed with a heavy slap. "Look, Eloise," she said, pulling out a chair from my tiny dining nook and spinning it around, sitting on it backward, a posture of forced, aggressive casualness. "This is family, and family is messy. We get it. You had your little tantrum at dinner. You made your point. You embarrassed everyone. Congratulations. Now, let's be adults." She tapped the folder. "The offer is $5 million. It's more than generous. It's ridiculous. But we want this misunderstanding put to bed tonight." She opened the folder. Inside were the same documents as before, but now they were flagged with a dozen bright yellow "Sign Here" stickers. "Just sign it," Sloane said. "Let's all go to sleep." I finished my sip of tea. I set the mug down gently. Then, I reached into the pocket of my pajama pants, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table between us and the folder. I tapped the screen. Opening my voice memo app, I pressed the large red button. The timer began to tick up. 0001, 0002. I placed the phone directly in the center of the table, the microphone aimed at them. Sloane stopped, her hand frozen over the folder. "What is that?" "What are you doing?" Genevieve's voice was sharp. "I'm recording this conversation," I said calmly. "For accuracy, please, continue. You were saying this is for family." Sloane's eyes narrowed to slits. You have no right." "I have every right. I'm in my home. Please, go on. You were talking about the waiver." Genevieve's hand flew to her pearls, a gesture of pure, reflexive panic. This was not in the script. They were here to manage me, and I was managing them. "This is not a game. Eloise," Genevieve's voice rose, cracking. "Do you have any idea what you are doing? If this disagreement gets out, it could destroy the Bright Harbor Trust. It could destroy Edmund's entire legacy." "Yes," Sloane added, leaning forward, trying to regain control. "Think of the people you would be hurting, the community programs, the scholarships. They will all die if there is a scandal. Is that what you want? To burn down a $50 million foundation just because your feelings were hurt?" They were trying to make me the villain, the ungrateful orphan, lashing out, destroying the very thing that had saved her. I watched the red light on my phone. "So it's not about family," I said quietly. "It's about the reputation." "Of course it's about the reputation," Sloane hissed. "The reputation is the trust. Without the faith of our donors, it's nothing. It's just a pile of money that you want to set on fire." Genevieve, seeing her $5 million offer had failed, visibly composed herself. She stepped forward, pushing Sloane back with a single, subtle hand gesture. The mask was back on. This was the CEO of Bright Harbor. "Eloise," she said, her voice now cold and transactional, "you are clearly a more pragmatic person than we gave you credit for. Very well, let's talk pragmatically." She paused, as if the words physically pained her. $15 million. 15. That is the final offer. And as a sign of goodwill, we will allow you to continue to use the Veil name. You will sign tonight, and you will sign a non-disclosure agreement. This conversation never happened. The incident at dinner never happened, and you will be a very, very wealthy woman. $15 million, and permission to keep the name that was never truly mine. I let the offer hang in the air. I let the silence stretch, the only sound the ticking of the recorder. Then I leaned forward. $15 million, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's a lot of money. It makes me wonder, what exactly is it buying? It's buying your silence, Sloane spat. I don't think so, I said, and I looked directly at Genevieve. I looked her in the eyes, perhaps for the first time in my life, as an equal. I think it's buying the invoices. Genevieve's face did not just pale, it went white, a stark, papery, bloodless white. Even her lips lost their color. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. No? I asked. I'm talking about the North Docks project. I'm talking about the renovation invoices, the ones for the community redevelopment, the invoices for the renovations that never actually happened. Sloane, for a single, fatal second, looked at her mother. That one glance was all the confirmation I needed. She knew. Of course she knew. Sloane recovered first, but her voice was too loud. That is a slanderous accusation. That is libel. You have no idea what you are talking about. I have the audio files, I said simply. I have the spreadsheets. Sloane actually laughed, a high, thin, terrified sound. Oh, please. The drawing girl? You think you found something? Files? Videos can be edited. Eloise, audio can be faked. Any decent lawyer will tear that apart in 5 minutes. She had walked right into it. You're right, I said, giving her a small, tight smile. They can be. It's a good thing we get to talk about the metadata tomorrow. Sloane's smile vanished. The what? Metadata, I repeated. The data about the data, timestamps, file creation dates, revision histories, digital signatures, all the little things you can't edit. Sloane, the things that prove exactly when Edmund made his recordings, the things that prove exactly when you and your ghost companies cashed the checks. My team at Arcadia were very, very good with metadata. They were both silent. The two most powerful women in Northbridge, standing in my 25-square-meter apartment, had been struck dumb. They had come with a checkbook. I had come with a database. As if on cue, my phone, still recording, buzzed on the table. The screen lit up. They both flinched, staring at it. A text message from E.C. They probably thought it was me. From my team. It was Elijah Rowan, my other E.C. The message was one word. Ready? Ready for the press release? Ready for the injunction? Ready for the board? I looked up. I think, I said, tapping the stop button on my recorder. This meeting is over. They did not say another word. Genevieve looked like she was going to be sick. Sloane grabbed the leather folder, her knuckles white. They turned and almost tripped over each other trying to get out of my doorway. The door slammed shut. The cheap latch clicked. The room was silent again, but the air was thick. They had left something behind. It was the scent of Sloane's expensive perfume, soured and curdled, mixed with the unmistakable, metallic tang of pure, messy, terrified power. It was the smell of their fear, and it was finally in my home, the scent of their fear. That sour, metallic perfume lingered in my apartment until morning. It was the only thing they had left behind that I could not scrub away. I did not sleep. When the first gray light of Friday morning hit the brick wall outside my window, I was already on my laptop, my tiny apartment transformed into a war room. The confrontation was not an end. It was the starting gun. My phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Rowan. The text was ready, I said. No preamble. Ready for what? Phase 2. His voice was clipped. All business. Edmund's final contingency. He didn't just leave you a will, Ms. Cordova. He left you an arsenal. Be at the corner of 4th and Midland in 1 hour. A black sedan. Get in the back. The corner was nondescript. The sedan pulled up precisely at 8 o'clock. I got in. Rowan was not inside. Instead, a thin man in a perfectly tailored, boring gray suit sat with a leather briefcase on his lap. He did not look at me. Ms. Cordova, he said, his eyes on the traffic. My name is Arthur Thorne. I am a forensic accountant. Mr. Edmund Vale retained my firm 6 months ago to conduct a discreet, independent shadow audit of the Bright Harbor Trust. He suspected financial irregularities. Edmund. 6 months ago. He had been planning this. He had known. That terrible, strained voicemail was not the beginning of his fear. It was the end. He gave us limited access, Thorne continued, his voice a dry monotone. We found a great deal, but we were firewalled from the executive accounts, Genevieve and Sloane's private ledgers. Your grandfather's last instruction to me was, if anything happens to me, you will report to Eloise. She will have the key. You, Ms. Cordova, are the key. With your authority as the sole legal beneficiary, we no longer have a firewall. We have a doorway. He opened his briefcase. It was empty, save for a single, sealed white envelope. The retainer has been paid. We are at your disposal. Our full findings on the shell corporations are inside. We just needed your signature to proceed with the deeper dive. I signed the partnership agreement. The war had officially begun. I took the envelope not to my apartment, but to Arcadia Pixel Lab, my tiny studio, my team, 3 young, brilliant designers and coders who had been with me since the beginning, looked up, surprised, when I walked in at 9 a.m. I gathered them around the scarred plywood table. I did not tell them everything. I did not tell them about the will or the 50 million, or the Thanksgiving dinner. This is the most important project we will ever do, I said, my voice low and urgent. I laid the first page from Thorne's envelope on the table. It was a complex flowchart. This is a hostile takeover, but we are the good guys. I have been given access to the finances of a major nonprofit foundation that is being mismanaged. They are stealing, and we are going to stop them. I pointed to the chart. I need data visualization. I need this. I tapped the confusing web of lines and boxes. To be simple, clean, undeniable, I need a story that a 5-year-old could understand. I need it ready in 1 week. For a full minute, they just stared at the page. Then, my lead developer, Maya, pushed her glasses up her nose. They're routing. It's a classic circle. Money goes out, gets washed through 3, 4 layers, and comes right back to the top. Show me, I said. For the next 4 days, we did not sleep. We turned the main wall of the studio into a digital red string map. We lived on stale coffee and adrenaline. Thorne's team fed us data in secure drops, and my team gave it a face. Here, Maya said, pointing to the screen on day 3. We were surrounded by empty pizza boxes. This is the North Docks project. Over the last 3 years, there have been 27 separate withdrawals, all for different amounts, all just under the $50,000 threshold that would require a full board vote. Trace them, I commanded. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. A new visualization appeared on the big screen. A thick red line snaked from the Bright Harbor Trust logo to a cluster of smaller boxes. They all went to these 14 different shell companies, registered as construction consultants, urban planners, supply logistics. The directors, I whispered. Run the directors of those companies. My other coder, Ben, took that. Running registration databases, Delaware, Nevada, Cayman Islands. Okay, I've got a match. One director is Sloan Vale's college roommate. 2 are registered to a post office box in Wilmington that was closed 5 years ago. And this one, Harrington Solutions LLC. The registered agent is G. H. Maiden, Genevieve Harrington, her maiden name. The room was silent. We were looking at it, the entire criminal enterprise, mapped out in our clean, minimalist design language. 24 years of being called less than, and here I was, the only person who could see the entire rotten truth. I don't just want a map, I said, my voice hard. I want a weapon. I want a dashboard, a real-time transparency dashboard, where every dollar is tracked, from donation to destination. We're going to build the internal version first, a secure portal, when we go live. We'll make this the new standard for the trust. While my team built the offense, Rowan built the defense. On Monday morning, 4 days after Thanksgiving, Elijah Rowan walked into the Northbridge Chancery Court. He was not in a high-profile media circus. He was in a quiet preliminary motions hearing. He stood before the judge, a formidable woman named Judge Alcroft. Your Honor, Rowan said, his voice respectful but firm. We are not here today to contest the directorship of the Bright Harbor Trust. We are here on an emergency motion. We request an immediate and temporary preservation order on all servers, financial records, and internal communications of the trust. The lawyer for Genevieve sighed. A high-priced man from a downtown firm scoffed. Your Honor, this is preposterous. On what grounds? On the grounds, Your Honor, Rowan said, sliding a copy of Edmund's will, the trigger clause, and the notarized affidavit from the signing across the bench, that the current illegitimate trustees are in the process of actively destroying evidence of massive-scale wire fraud and embezzlement. We have reason to believe the digital shredders are already running. The judge read the trigger clause. She watched the 30-second clip of Edmund's testimony from the digital recorder. Her face hardened. The gavel cracked. It was a small sound, but it shook the foundation of their empire. Order granted, she said. Effective immediately, all records, digital and physical, are to be preserved, pending a full hearing. Mr. Rowan, this is an extraordinary claim. You had better be right. I am, Your Honor, Rowan said. He called me the second he was out of the courtroom. The shredders are offline, he said. They can't delete a single email. They're trapped inside their own servers. The bank freeze was holding. Genevieve was locked out. Now, she was legally blind. 2. The rumors started to fly. The first call came on Tuesday, a private number. Ms. Cordova? The voice was old, wary. My name is Arthur Covington. I sit on the board of the Bright Harbor Trust. I was a dear friend of your grandfather's. My heart hammered. Mr. Covington, I, and 2 others on the board, have had suspicions for years about the North Docks, about Sloane's pet projects. But Genevieve controls the agenda. She outvotes us at every turn. We heard what happened at Thanksgiving. We've seen the bank freeze. The entire foundation is teetering. He paused. We are waiting for a signal. Ms. Cordova, we are waiting for solid ground to stand on. Give us the cover to do the right thing, and we will stand with you. 3 board members, quiet allies, waiting. The second call came an hour later. It was from the city's largest private philanthropist. Ms. Cordova, we are holding our winter pledge. We are publicly waiting for the results of the leadership review. Privately, we're waiting for you. Show us something real. Show us a path forward, and the check is yours. The pieces were in place. That night, Rowan, Thorne, and I met in my apartment. It was the first time the 3 of us had been in the same room. Thorne spoke first, tapping his briefcase. We have enough. Wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement. We can go to the district attorney tomorrow. We can put them in prison. I looked at the picture of Edmund on my desk, the one from the photo booth at Harbor Park. I thought of the cold gravy on my chest, the humiliation. The desire for revenge was a hot, bitter taste in my mouth. I swallowed it. No, I said. They both looked at me, stunned. This isn't about jail, I said, my voice clear and certain. This isn't about revenge. If we go criminal, the trust is dragged through a 5-year legal battle. It dies. The community programs do die. The headlines will be Vale Family Feud. Genevieve wins. She burns the whole thing down just to spite me. I stood up, pacing my tiny room. We are not here to punish. We are here to fix. This is not a gotcha to make us feel good. This is a restoration. We are giving the money back to the community. We are returning Edmund's name to what it was supposed to mean. The narrative is not Family Feud. The narrative is transparency, restoration, the next chapter. Rowan, for the first time since I had met him, almost smiled. A corporate restructuring, he said. Not a family war, clean, public, undeniable. Exactly, I said. We don't go to the DA. We go to the donors. We go to the public. So where do we do it? Thorne asked. Where is the venue for this restructuring? I looked at the calendar on my wall. There was a red circle on it, a date I had once dreaded. We do it on her stage, I said. The Bright Harbor Annual Gala. It's at the Wyndham Atrium. It's in 5 days. She'll cancel it, Rowan said immediately. The second she gets wind of this, she'll lock the doors. She can't, I said. I've been monitoring the social feeds. She just sent out a press release this morning. It's her coronation. It's the one night the entire city, every major donor, every politician, every media outlet, is in one room. It's her debut as the new head of the trust. Canceling it now, with the bank freeze and the rumors, it would be admitting defeat. It would confirm everything. She has to hold this gala. She's trapped by her own ego. The last 5 days were a blur. My team at Arcadia finalized the presentation. It was only 3 slides. Slide 1. The cover page of Edmund Vale's last will and testament. My name, clear as day. Slide 2. Article 4. Section B. The trigger clause. The text, after the primary beneficiary, reaches the age of 28 years, and null and void unless co-signed, highlighted in a stark, impossible-to-miss red. Slide 3. The dashboard. Our clean, simple, devastating visualization of the cash flow. The bright red line showing millions siphoned from community projects directly into the Harrington Solutions LLC and the other 13 shell companies. I gave my team their final instructions. No emotion, no accusations. We are not lawyers. We are presenting data. You will stick to the facts, dates, times, numbers, signatures. Let the data tell the story. That's all. I went to a small consignment shop on the other side of town. I found a dress. It was not a glittering ball gown. It was a simple, severe, architecturally cut dress in a deep, monochromatic charcoal gray. It was not a color of celebration. It was a color of business, a color that was impossible to ignore or dismiss. The night before the gala, I was in Rowan's office. The only sound was the hum of his ancient laser printer. It spat out a stack of 50 pages. "What's that?" I asked, bagging up the final presentation binders. "Insurance," he said, tapping the freshly printed stack. "A motion for a vote of no confidence in the acting trustee and 50 emergency ballots for the election of a provisional CEO." He looked at me. "Just in case Mr. Covington and his friends need a little encouragement to do the right thing." He handed me a binder. "You are ready, Ms. Cordova." I went home. I hung the gray dress on the back of my door. I looked at my reflection in the small, cracked bathroom mirror. The person looking back was not the girl from the end of the table. The long-term guest was gone. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Rowan. He was already at the Wyndham Atrium, posing as a donor. "They're here. The doors are open. The room is full." I took a deep breath. I put on the dress. I was not Eloise, the drawing girl. I was Eloise Cordova, the executor. And I was on my way. The Wyndham Atrium was designed to intimidate. It was a 3-story cavern of glass and polished white marble. Thousands of tiny suspended lights glittered like a captured galaxy. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and hothouse lilies. 500 of Northbridge's elite, a sea of black ties and jewel-toned gowns, drifted through the space, champagne flutes in hand. It was a monument to manufactured prestige, and tonight, it was Genevieve's coronation hall. On the central stage, bathed in a soft, forgiving spotlight, she stood. She was radiant. The fear from my apartment, the mascara-streaked panic, was gone. It had been scrubbed away, replaced by a mask of serene, confident power. She was wearing a custom-made gown of deep emerald green, the Harrington Vale family diamonds glittering at her throat, a queen surveying her court. She was delivering her keynote speech. "And as we move into this new era," her voice, amplified by the speakers, washed over the hushed crowd, smooth and practiced. "We honor Edmund's legacy, of course, but we also look forward. We look to a future of streamlined philanthropy, of bold new initiatives. Like the North Docks, I thought, standing just inside the lobby. And I am so humbled, so truly humbled, to be the one guiding that future." The applause was polite, predictable, a ripple of gloved hands and expensive bracelets. I had not used the main entrance. I had come in through the side, the same service hallway I had been relegated to at the last gala. I walked past the velvet ropes, my heels clicking on the marble floor. My charcoal gray dress, simple and unadorned, felt like armor. 2 large security guards, men I did not recognize, hired by Genevieve's private team, stepped forward immediately, blocking my path. Their suits were too tight, their expressions flat. "Ma'am, this is a private event. I need to see your name on the list." I looked at him calmly. "My name is Eloise Cordova. I am not on the list." "Then you need to leave," the first guard said, his voice bored. He put a heavy, warning hand on my upper arm. "Take your hand off my client." The voice was not mine. It was Elijah Rowan's. It was sharp, cold, and it cut through the low murmur of the lobby. Rowan materialized from the crowd, looking severe and powerful in a dark, perfectly cut suit. The dusty, rumpled lawyer from the third-floor office was gone. This was an instrument of the court. "This woman," Rowan said, his voice rising, loud enough for the 20 people nearest the lobby to turn their heads, "is the primary beneficiary and sole legal successor trustee of the Bright Harbor Trust." He produced the thick, leather-bound original will. He did not show it to the guard. He held it up, angled toward the nearest cluster of guests, who were now staring openly. "This is a legal document, filed with the court," Rowan announced, his voice ringing with authority. "And you, sir," he said, pinning the guard with a cold stare, "are currently committing assault against the rightful chief executive officer of this foundation." The guard snatched his hand back from my arm as if he had been electrocuted. The music, a live string quartet playing something forgettable, seemed to falter. A violin string squeaked in the sudden tension. The silence started as a small ripple in the lobby. It spread, moving through the vast, 3-story hall like a shockwave. 500 heads turned, 500 conversations, 500 clinking glasses, 500 polite, meaningless laughs. They all died, one by one. The entire galaxy of glittering lights seemed to dim, the focus of the room contracting onto the 3 of us. On the stage, Genevieve paused mid-sentence, her perfect smile frozen. She saw me. She saw the gray dress. She saw Rowan. She saw the document in his hand. Her face, for a split second, went the same bloodless, papery white I had seen in my apartment. From her seat of honor at the front table, Sloane shot to her feet. Her chair scraped loudly on the marble. She was frantic, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. She signaled wildly to the security guards, waving them forward. "Get her out! What are you doing? Get them out!" But the guards were frozen, looking at Rowan's document, then at the sea of guests, then back. They were paralyzed. A thin man in an expensive suit, Genevieve's own legal counsel, a man I recognized from Sunday dinners, rushed to Sloane's side. He grabbed her arm, hard. "Sit down," he hissed, his lips barely moving. "What are you doing?" Sloane was frantic, her voice a shrill whisper. "Call the police. Get her off the stage." "Are you insane?" the lawyer whispered back, his face pale with panic. He gestured with his chin. "Look around you. Every camera phone in the city is pointed at us. The Northbridge Gazette is right there. The foundation's biggest donors are right there. You touch her. You make her a martyr. Sit, down, and be quiet." Sloane looked. She saw the sea of glowing screens, hundreds of them, all pointed at the stage, all pointed at us. She sank back into her chair as if her bones had dissolved. Rowan and I did not walk. We advanced. We moved down the central aisle, the crowd parting before us as if the marble floor had cracked open. We walked to the small steps at the side of the stage. Genevieve was trapped, blinded by her own spotlight, as we ascended. My heart was a hammer against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I knew that my team, Maya and Ben, were already in the tech booth at the back, disguised as event staff, their laptops plugged in. I stepped up to the second podium, the one meant for the auctioneer. Genevieve and I stood 6 feet apart, a study in contrasts, the glittering, false queen in her emeralds, and the severe gray executor. I did not speak. I looked to the back of the room, at the tech booth, and I nodded. On the massive twin screens flanking the stage, where a tasteful Bright Harbor Gala logo had been looping, an image flashed. Slide 1. The cover of Edmund Vale's Last Will and Testament. My name, clear as day. The sound from the crowd was a single, collective intake of breath. Before Genevieve could find her voice, before she could stammer out a protest, the slide changed. The video played Edmund, in Rowan's office. He looked pale. He looked tired, but his eyes were on fire. My last will and testament. His voice filled the atrium. The room was so quiet, so perfectly still. You could hear the digital hiss on the audio track. I am of sound mind and clear body. and I am making this change free of any duress." Genevieve lunged for her microphone. This is a fabrication. This is a deep fake. Someone stop this. This is slander." "I am naming Eloise Cordova as my successor," Edmund's voice continued, overriding her, booming through the hall. "She is the only one I trust, the only one with the integrity to protect it from the internal rot, from the greed of those who see charity as a veil." "It's not slander," I said. My voice, amplified, was quiet, cold, and perfectly clear. It was the first time I had spoken. The sound of my own voice silenced Genevieve's. "This is a notarized, verified recording, filed with the court 2 weeks ago." On the screen, the video of Edmund was replaced. Slide 2. The trigger clause. I read it aloud, my voice steady. "Any and all amendments made after the primary beneficiary, Eloise Cordova, reaches the age of 28 years are hereby rendered null and void unless explicitly co-signed by the aforementioned beneficiary, Eloise Cordova." I lowered the microphone. "I turned 29 2 months ago. I never co-signed. The amendment naming Genevieve Harrington as trustee is, and has always been, legally worthless." Another gasp, but this one was not shock. It was anger. It was the sound of 500 people realizing they had been fooled. "And this," I said, signaling to Maya in the booth, "is why—" Slide 3, the dashboard, our visualization. It was beautiful, in its terrible simplicity. The bright red lines, the flow of money, the $50 million asset pool of the trust. The lines snaked out, from community projects, North Docks redevelopment, the Elise Cordova Scholarship Fund. They all flowed, unchecked, into the same 14 boxes. And then, the boxes resolved, the names appeared. Harrington Solutions, LLC, Sloan Vale Designs, Archer Vale Consulting, Northbridge Holdings Group. The room was absolutely silent. The air crackled. This was no longer a scandal. It was a confession, broadcast 20 feet high. A man stood up from a table near the front. It was Arthur Covington, the board member, his face flushed with a dark, furious red. "I knew it!" His voice, shaking with rage, carried across the room. "I knew it! We asked about the North Docks. We asked at 3 separate meetings. You told us it was over budget. You lied to us. You lied to the board." Another man stood, the philanthropist who had called me, his wife gripping his arm. "We suspected this for years. You stole from children. You stole from the community housing project." Genevieve grabbed her microphone, her face contorted into a mask of pure reptilian fury. "Lies! This is slander! This is libel! I will sue. I will sue every person in this room. This is a family matter." Rowan stepped up to the main podium, his tall frame eclipsing hers. "Please do, Ms. Harrington." His voice boomed, cold and precise. "We welcome it, and we will submit as evidence the full, unredacted financials, which, as of Monday morning, were placed under a court-ordered preservation order by the Northbridge Chancery Court. You cannot delete them. You cannot shred them. The evidence is secure." That was the killing blow. Court-ordered preservation. The accusation was no longer just mine. It was the court's. Covington, the board member, was already moving. He was joined by the other 2 allies, and then 4 more board members, their faces pale and furious. They were converging on the stage. "We are calling an emergency vote," Covington announced, his voice raw. "Right now, a vote of no confidence in Genevieve Harrington and Sloan Vale." "You can't do this!" Genevieve shrieked, backing away from the podium. "This is not a board meeting!" "It is now," the second board member said, a woman who had once been Genevieve's closest friend. "It's in the bylaws, Article 7, emergency session." Rowan's legal team, who had been waiting by the doors, was already there, handing out the pre-printed ballots I had made last night. It was over in 90 seconds. All in favor of the immediate removal of Genevieve Harrington and Sloane Vale from all duties and oversight? 7 hands went up. Opposed? 2 hands, Genevieve's oldest, most compromised allies, stayed down, their owners suddenly fascinated by their dessert plates. "The vote carries," Covington said, his voice raw. 7-2. Genevieve Harrington is removed as acting trustee. The board recognizes Eloise Cordova as the sole rightful interim chief executive officer of the Bright Harbor Trust, effective immediately. Genevieve stumbled, grasping the podium for support, but no one was looking at her. Sloane, however, was practical. She knew when the fight was lost. I watched her slip from her chair, her head down, grabbing her glittering clutch purse. She was not running. She was escaping. She made it to the marble lobby, heading for the massive glass doors that led to the valet, to the freedom of the street. But as she reached them, the doors swung open. A blinding wall of light, flashbulbs, dozens of them. The press, the Northbridge Gazette, the city bloggers, the local news affiliates, Rowan's Final Insurance. They had been held outside, told there was a major announcement. They had been let in the precise second the vote was confirmed. The doors, I realized, were one way. They let the press in. They did not let the disgraced out. Sloane froze, caught like a rabbit in the headlights, the flashes reflecting in her terrified eyes. She turned, looking for another exit, but there was none. She was trapped in the lobby, forced to turn and sit on a hard marble bench, her back to the crowd, a prisoner in the palace she had helped build. I stepped back to the microphone. The room was a chaotic mess of people shouting, board members arguing, and cameras flashing. I waited. Slowly, the noise died down. All eyes, once again, returned to me, to the woman in the simple gray dress. I looked out at the crowd, at the donors, at the allies, at the press, now filling the back of the room. "My grandfather built this trust to serve the city of Northbridge," I said, my voice steady, carrying over the chaos. Somewhere, that mission was lost. It became a private bank. It became a veil. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Tonight, that stops. The restoration begins now." I looked directly into the lens of the nearest television camera, the one with the bright red recording light. "From now on," I said, "every single dollar has a home, and we will show you its address." My final words, "Every single dollar has a home," hung in the electrified air. The room did not erupt in applause. It erupted in chaos. Genevieve, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and fury, finally broke. The mask did not just crack. It shattered, with a guttural scream that was animalistic, a sound I had never heard in the halls of Harrington Hill. She lunged. She did not lunge at me. She lunged at the nearest object. She grabbed a heavy crystal champagne flute from the podium, the one she had been toasting her new era with, and hurled it. It flew past my shoulder and struck the massive projector screen behind me. The crystal shattered against the image of her own Harrington Solutions LLC logo. It was a spider web of broken glass over a web of lies. The sound of the impact was sharp, violent. It was the last desperate sound of the old regime. But here's the truth about power. When it truly shifts, it moves silently. No one screamed. No one gasped at her outburst. In fact, most of the room had already turned away from her. Maya, my developer, had just done something brilliant from the tech booth. On the screens, next to the devastating flowchart, a simple QR code had appeared. The crowd, the donors, the press, the city council members, instinctively raised their phones. The room was filled with the quiet whir and click of hundreds of cameras, not capturing Genevieve's tantrum, but scanning the code. They were plugging directly into the live, internal transparency dashboard my team had built. They were bypassing the performance and going straight to the data. Genevieve's act of violence, meant to be a show-stopping explosion, was nothing. It was a broken glass in a room full of auditors. The crowd was scrolling, their faces illuminated by the pale blue light of their phones, their eyes tracing the very numbers she had tried to bury. Sloane, however, was not broken. She was cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous. Trapped by the wall of press at the lobby doors, she had been forced back into the main hall by the converging crowd. She found herself just feet from the stage, near the steps. Her eyes, identical to her mother's, were two burning chips of ice. They found mine. She stalked toward me, her voice a low, venomous hiss that was meant for me alone. "You will never win," she seethed, her hands clenched at her sides, her diamond bracelets digging into her skin. "Ever. You are a parasite. Eloise, you have no name. You have no blood. You don't belong to this family. You do not belong to this name." She spat the words at me, the last weapon she had left. My illegitimacy, my unworthiness, the core truth of my 24 years as the long-term guest. I looked down at her from the slight elevation of the stage. The old Eloise would have flinched. The old Eloise would have looked away, accepting the verdict. I did not. I held her gaze. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I pointed one, steady finger at the giant, illuminated spreadsheet on the screen behind me. "You're right, Sloane," I said, my voice quiet, but it carried in the strange new hush of the room. "I don't belong to the name." I tapped the screen, where the numbers were glowing. "But you see, the name can't keep the numbers. The numbers keep the name, and you don't have them anymore." Her face went slack. It was a vocabulary she did not possess, a logic that could not be defeated with an insult. A small, weasel-faced woman in a black suit, Genevieve's personal publicist, scurried onto the stage. She grabbed Genevieve's arm, her back to the crowd, and whispered urgently, "Cry, Genevieve, you need to cry. Show remorse. Try tears." It was a pathetic, amateur move. Genevieve, a bad actress at the end of a failed play, obeyed. She put her head in her hands. Her shoulders began to shake, and she produced a dry, rasping sob. But the cameras were not kind. They were not forgiving. They were high definition. A Gazette photographer, his lens 2 feet from her face, snapped a picture. The flash illuminated not a grieving widow, but a single, thick, black streak of mascara, a grotesque crack in her perfect foundation. It was the look of calculation, not grief. The photo would be on the front page tomorrow, the caption already writing itself. Then, a new voice cut through the performative sob. The scholarship money? It was the philanthropist from the front table, the one who had held his pledge. He was holding his phone up, scrolling through the dashboard. "Last year's scholarship fund, the Elise Room Community Grant," he said, his voice shaking with fury. He was looking at me, but his question was for Genevieve. "We personally donated $200,000 to that fund. It's empty. Where's the money?" Before Genevieve could answer, before her lawyer could object, Maya's fingers were flying in the tech booth. The main screen split. On one side was the man's pledge, the digital record of his $200,000 donation, clearly marked scholarship. On the other side, a series of transaction logs. "The donation was received on October 1st. My voice was flat, a narrator stating facts. "On October 3rd, $150,000 was transferred to Harrington Solutions LLC for administrative fees. On October 5th, another $50,000 was transferred to Sloane Vale Designs for promotional materials." The cross-reference vouchers were published on the internal server 20 minutes ago, when we first went live. They were silent, the philanthropist, the board members, the entire room. They were watching, in real time, their generosity being converted into Sloane's new handbag. The theft was not an abstract spreadsheet. It was a direct, personal assault. Genevieve, seeing the room had turned on her completely, spun, her eyes wild, searching for her last ally. She found him, standing pale and trembling near the silent string quartet. Uncle Archer, my adoptive father, the one who had signed the papers, the man whose catchphrase was, "Don't make a scene." "Archer!" Genevieve shrieked. Her voice was raw, pleading. "Archer, say something. Tell them. Tell them this is a lie. Tell them about the paperwork. You're the fund coordinator. You signed off on it. Tell them." She had done it. In her final desperate panic, she had implicated her own husband. Archer Vale, a man I had only ever seen in shades of beige, a man made of polite murmurs and quiet cowardice, turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. He looked at Genevieve. He looked at the screen with his name on it. Archer Vale Consulting. He looked at the 500 faces staring at him, faces of men he played golf with, men whose foundations he had solicited. He did not speak. Slowly, his shaking hand reached up to the lapel of his tuxedo. He unpinned the small, embossed gold badge he wore to every event. It read, "Bright Harbor Trust, Fund Coordinator." He held it for a moment, his hand trembling. Then, he set it down on the linen-covered table of a horrified guest. He set it down, turned, and walked. Not to his wife, but toward the exit. His shoulders slumped. A man already erased. He had, in his own quiet way, just signed his confession. The room was heavy. The weight of their crimes had sucked all the air out. The outrage was palpable, but it was still just numbers. It was still just rich people arguing with other rich people about rich people money. I had one more card to play. "The dashboard is not the only truth here," I said into the microphone. I looked toward the service door, the one I had entered through. I nodded at Rowan, who was waiting. He opened the door. 3 people walked out. They were not in tuxedos. They were in kitchen whites. It was Maria, the head cook from Thanksgiving, and 2 of her staff. They walked hesitantly into the glittering, silent room, their eyes wide. They looked terrified. I stepped down from the stage and walked to them. I stood with them, in my gray dress, in the center of the marble floor. I held the wireless microphone out to Maria. "Maria," I said gently, "can you please tell them what you told me? About the community meals program, the one the trust was supposed to be funding for the Riverbend shelter." Maria's hands were shaking. She took the microphone. She looked not at the crowd, but at me. I nodded. We used to make 500 hot meals," she said, her voice small, but the microphone carried it everywhere. "For the shelter, every Friday. It was good. Mr. Edmund, he started it. He loved it." She took a shaky breath. "Then, 6 months ago, we were told the funding was cut. For budget reasons, they told us to cut the meals by half, and then by half again, and then last month." She was crying now, quiet, angry tears. "They told us to just send the leftovers, the scraps, from the events, from this event. They told us to send our scraps to the shelter and to mark it down as full donation value on the paperwork." The room was dead, silent. It was one thing to see a spreadsheet. It was another to hear the voice of the woman who was forced to send garbage to a homeless shelter while the board members ate lobster. Maria's voice did what my data could not. It reached their hearts. It showed them the human cost. Sloane had called me trash. She and her mother had treated an entire community as the same. The weight in the room finally shifted. It moved off the glittering, useless crystal chandeliers. It moved off the silk-draped walls and the diamond necklaces. It settled, hard and heavy, onto the cold, undeniable truth of the spreadsheet, onto the truth of Maria's voice. I took the microphone back from her. I thanked her. I walked back to the stage, alone. I looked out at the room, at the cameras, at the donors, at Genevieve, who was now just a broken, empty shell in an emerald dress, at Sloane, who was staring at her hands in the lobby, a prisoner of the light. "Light," I said, my voice clear and final. "Doesn't know how to tremble. The work begins tomorrow. We will find every dollar. We will return it, and we will rebuild." For a full 10 seconds, there was silence. Then, one person began to clap. It was the philanthropist. Then another. It was Covington. Then the press. Then the other donors. It was not the polite, scattered applause of a society event. It was a wave. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation. But I knew, as I stood there, they were not clapping for me. They were not clapping for Eloise Cordova. They were clapping for the end of the lies. They were clapping for the data. They were clapping for the simple, undeniable, beautiful clarity of the method. And that was all I had ever wanted. The applause at the Wyndham atrium faded around midnight. The flashing cameras, the shell-shocked faces of the donors, the humiliating tableau of Sloan trapped in the lobby, it all dissolved. By Monday morning, 8 a.m., the adrenaline was gone, replaced by the heavy, silent weight of the work ahead. The headlines in the Northbridge Gazette were brutal. Bright Harbor broken. Vale heiress ousts stepmother in fraud exposé. The headlines were wrong. I had not exposed fraud just to watch the foundation break. I did it to rebuild it. Demolition is loud, fast, and deeply satisfying. Reconstruction is slow, quiet, and thankless. And it had to start immediately. I did not move into Genevieve's sprawling, mahogany-paneled office at the Trust headquarters, a room that smelled of her expensive, cloying perfume and old leather-bound lies. I stayed at Arcadia Pixel Lab. That 25-square-meter studio, my former sanctuary, was now the official engine room of the Bright Harbor Trust. My team, Maya, Ben, and the two other designers who had been with me from the beginning, looked at me with a mixture of terror and awe. "Good morning," I said, setting a box of cheap coffee on our scarred plywood table. Arcadia Pixel Lab is now the official transparency product team for the Bright Harbor Trust. Maya pushed her glasses up. What? The dashboard we built for the gala? That was not a presentation. That was the prototype, I said. We are now taking it live. We are not a charity that uses technology. We are a technology company that delivers charity. Our entire product, from this day forward, is trust, and we build that with data. My first act as interim CEO was not to fire the old guard. It was to pass a new bylaw. I called it the 24-hour rule. I gathered the shell-shocked, terrified remnant of the accounting department in the main conference room. From this moment, I announced, my voice echoing slightly in the overly formal room, there is no end of quarter. There is only end of day. Every single expenditure, every single donation, every line item over $1 is to be reconciled and pushed to the public-facing dashboard by midnight, every single day, no exceptions. The interim chief financial officer, a man who had survived by being invisible, stammered, "But Ms. Cordova, that is proprietary data. We cannot just publish our internal accounts." "It is community data," I corrected him. "You are merely its custodian. If we have nothing to hide, we hide nothing. And speaking of which," I looked at Maya. "The code for the audit dashboard? I want it cleaned up and pushed to a public repository. We are open sourcing our verification process." "You want to let other people see our code?" Ben asked, incredulous. "I want independent auditors, university accounting programs, and any curious citizen coder in Northbridge to be able to pull our data and check our math. That is the new product. Verifiable, absolute truth." The next mandate was the firewall. Genevieve and Sloan had used the trust as a family bank. I was building a fortress. Rowan helped me draft the new conflict of interest regulations. It was not a guideline. It was an absolute barrier. Nepotism is no longer a perk. It is a disqualification. I read aloud at the first tense emergency board meeting. No vendor, contractor, or employee may be a relative, by blood, marriage, or close association, to any board member or executive. No blind trust loopholes. No arm's-length agreements. If your cousin owns the printing company, we are using the guys across town. If your brother-in-law runs a construction firm, he is welcome to bid in another city. This is absolute. This is non-negotiable. The old board members, the ones who had sided with me, shifted uncomfortably. This was not what they had signed up for, but they had voted me in. They were stuck with me. Furthermore, I continued, this board is incomplete. The board was a closed loop of Genevieve's wealthy friends. I am using my executive authority to expand the board by 3 seats, effective immediately. These seats will not be filled by donors. My new appointments shocked them. The first seat went to Maria, the head cook who had spoken at the gala. The second went to the director of the Riverbend shelter. The third went to a public defense attorney from the North Docks district. They are not related to anyone, I said, cutting off the protest I saw rising in Mr. Covington's face. Their only qualification is that they are the ones this trust is supposed to be serving. They are the new stakeholders. Now, the cleanup, the North Docks project. The name alone was a symbol of the rot. I tasked Thorne, the forensic accountant, with leading the full external audit, but with specific instructions. We are not going on a witch hunt, I told him in his gray, sterile office. I do not want a media circus focused on victims and villains. That helps no one. I want numbers, progress, and recovery. What was stolen? And how do we get it back? We will not name the contractors who were duped. We will chase the money from the shell companies that duped them. This is about restoration, not retribution. The bank freeze and the court order had been incredibly effective. The money, millions of it, was still sitting in the shell accounts, frozen. It was a simple matter of legal recovery. We held our first public press conference 2 weeks later. We did not hold it in an atrium. We held it in the drafty, unfinished lobby of the North Docks Community Center, which was still just concrete studs and plastic sheeting flapping in the wind. I stood at a simple podium with a portable speaker. We have, as of this morning, recovered an initial $9.2 million from the frozen, fraudulent accounts established by the previous administration. I said to the small cluster of reporters, this money is not going back into a general fund. It is going exactly where it was supposed to go. Starting today, $4 million is being transferred immediately to the Community Housing Fund to build the low-income units this building was supposed to support. $5.2 million is being used to permanently endow the scholarship funds that were drained, including the one named for my mother, Elise Cordova. This was our moment. This was the product launch. For decades, the Bright Harbor Trust operated on this, I said, holding up one of Genevieve's thick, glossy, and completely vague annual reports. I tossed it in a nearby trash bin. This is the old way. It is a monument to ego. This is the new way. I pointed to a large monitor my team had set up, showing the live dashboard. We are launching the Follow the Dollar initiative. If you are a donor, you will no longer get a fawning Christmas card. You will get a unique, persistent tracking link. You donate $10,000 to the scholarship fund, you will see that $10,000 leave your account. Enter ours, get tagged for the fund, and you will see the receipts when that money is paid out for tuition. You will track your dollar in real time until it becomes a service. And to prove the point, my first approved expenditure was not for a new office. We signed a lease on a storefront down the street. We opened the North Docks Community Legal Center. The very program Genevieve had used as a cover, it was small. It smelled like new paint and cheap carpet, but it was real. It was open. The sign on the door was printed on my office laser printer, but it was there. But how to prevent this from ever happening again? We needed an immune system. Maya's team built it in a single day, an anonymous, encrypted, third-party hosted whistleblower portal. The link was on the front page of our new website. If you are an employee, a vendor, or even a board member, I wrote in an all-staff email, and you see something that feels wrong, you report it. The report does not come to me. It does not go to HR. It goes directly to our external auditors at Thorne's firm. We are building a culture where the person who speaks up is the hero, not the problem. Finally, we needed new metrics for success. Genevieve's metric was the prestige of the guest list at the gala. Ours would be efficiency. I am setting our first quarter key performance indicators. I told the new, expanded board, They were all sitting in our cramped studio, perched on stools and spare chairs. Our success is no longer money raised, it is impact delivered. First, our administrative overhead, salaries, events, printing, everything that is not a direct service will not exceed 8%. Covington whistled. Eloise, the national average is 15, 20 for some. I know, I said. We will be better. We are a tech company, remember? We will be lean. Second, 95% of all funded projects will have geotagged, date-stamped progress photos uploaded to the dashboard weekly. If we say we are building a wheelchair ramp at the shelter, the public will see the concrete being poured on Monday and the first resident using it on Friday. They will not wait for an annual report. The work was hard. It was not glamorous. It was late nights fixing broken CSS. It was arguing with vendors over pennies. It was data entry. So much data entry, but it was real. Arcadia Pixel Lab, my little studio, was no longer just designing websites. We were designing trust, and transparency was our only product. The first official offer from the new, restructured board, after the forensic audits had begun and the first wave of recovered money had settled, was the key to the penthouse suite at Harrington Hill. It was Genevieve's former residence. They called it an apartment befitting the CEO. I signed the polite, formal rejection letter that same afternoon. I kept my 25-square-meter studio. I kept the window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was the only place in Northbridge that had ever been truly mine, the only fortress that had never been breached. It was the place where I had gone from being a guest to an executor. But I did make one change. The lumpy, faded, second-hand armchair I had found on a curb 4 years ago, the one with the sagging springs and the permanent stain. I dragged it down to the alley myself. I took my first paycheck, not a stipend, a salary, and I walked to a small, independent woodshop in the North Docks. It was a business we had just saved. One of the vendors whose legitimate invoices had been buried by Genevieve's fraud. I spoke to the owner, a woman with sawdust in her hair, and I pointed to a chair in her display window. It was simple. It was solid oak, with clean, unadorned lines and a dark, hand-rubbed finish. It was not a throne. It was not a statement. It was just a place to sit, built by hands that were honest, from wood that was real. It cost more than 3 months of my old stipend. It was the best, most expensive thing I had ever owned. I put it by the window. From there, I could see my brick wall, and I could see the old, battered leather chessboard Edmund had left with me. He had visited my tiny apartment only once, a year before his death. He had looked around, at the mismatched furniture and the peeling paint, and he had not offered pity. He had offered strategy. He'd unrolled the board and set up the pieces on my scarred coffee table. "You know the rule, Eloise," he'd said, his voice quiet, his large hand tapping a single, white pawn. The pawn is the weakest piece on the board. Everyone ignores it. They call it cannon fodder. They push it around. They sacrifice it without a second thought because it is replaceable. He'd tapped the pawn again, then slid it, square by square, across the checkered leather, navigating it past knights and bishops. "But if that little pawn," he'd whispered, his eyes finding mine, "that scrap, can just survive the battle, if it can dodge the queen and outwit the rooks, if it can just make it, all the way, to the 8th rank." He pushed it onto the final square. It doesn't just get a reward, it gets promoted. It becomes the queen, the most powerful piece on the board. It changes the entire game. He had left the board with me. I sat in my new oak chair. Looking at it, the game was over. The pawn had crossed the board, and I was just beginning to understand what that new power meant. The apologies started about a week after the gala. They came in a slow, awkward, humiliating parade, right to the door of my tiny apartment. Cousins I had not spoken to in 5 years, aunts who used to look through me at Sunday dinners, suddenly remembering my birthday. They all suddenly knew my address. They brought expensive pastries I did not eat. They brought bottles of wine I did not drink. They brought their stilted, practiced excuses. We had no idea. Eloise? Genevieve was, well, she was always so convincing. We always knew you were special. Dear, we were just waiting for you to find your voice. They were lies, every last one. They were social maneuvers, clumsy attempts to secure their own seat at the new table, to ensure their own names were not scrubbed from the donor plaques. They were terrified of the new transparency. I was polite, I was cold. I did not invite them in. I accepted their apologies at the open door, a barrier they could not cross. I accepted their words, but I refused them a seat. I did not offer them tea. I thanked them for coming, and I closed the door, leaving them in the dim, flickering hallway light. I was not family. I was the CEO. They were, finally, learning the difference. The only visitor I let inside was Archer Vale. He showed up one rainy Tuesday night, not with a gift, but with a confession. He looked 10 years older. He was not wearing an expensive suit, just a rumpled sweater, and his hands trembled. He stood in the middle of my small room, twisting a damp hat, refusing to sit in the new chair. I didn't know about the shell companies. Eloise, he whispered, his eyes fixed on the floor. Not the Cayman accounts, I swear, but I knew about the North Docks. I knew the invoices were wrong. I knew the numbers were inflated, and I signed them anyway. Why? I asked. I did not feel the hot spike of anger I had expected. I just felt a deep, profound exhaustion. I was afraid, he said, and he finally looked at me. His eyes were watery, pathetic, the eyes of a man who had been a ghost in his own life. I was afraid of her, of Genevieve, afraid of losing my place, my allowance, my position. I've been a coward, Eloise, my entire useless life. He stood there, a broken, empty man, waiting for my judgment, for my absolution, or for my condemnation. Yes, you were, I said. You were afraid, and you were a coward, and you let them hurt people. You let them hurt Edmund. You let them steal from people who had nothing, all to protect your own comfort. He flinched, as if I had struck him. He deserved it. But, I continued, you also walked away at the gala. You were the only one who did. You put down your badge. That was the first true thing you have done in 20 years. I walked to my desk, past the stacks of audit reports, and pulled out a single, thin file. It was the architectural plan for the new legal aid center. The time for being afraid is over. Archer, I said, handing the file to him. This center needs a volunteer coordinator, someone who knows the old paperwork, someone who knows exactly where all the bodies are buried and how Genevieve's system worked, so we can dismantle it, piece by piece. He stared at the file as if it were a snake. It is unpaid, I said flatly. It is thankless. You will be in a basement office in the worst part of town. It will be the hardest work you have ever done, and it will probably be the only thing you ever do that matters. He looked at me, his mouth half open. From fear, I said quietly, to action. There is still time. Archer, but it is running out. He took the file. His hand was shaking, but he took it. He nodded, his throat working, and he left. It was a start. I stopped letting others tell stories about me. I stopped letting them define me as the orphan, or the heiress, or the avenger. The headlines in the Gazette were still obsessed with the family drama, with where Genevieve was, with what Sloane would do next. I ignored them. I let the work tell the story. Our first completed project, funded entirely by the $9.2 million we had recovered, was the community reading room in the North Docks. When it came time for the dedication plaque, the board suggested the Edmund Vale Memorial Library. I refused. Edmund had his name on half the buildings in the city. The plaque was small, brushed bronze, and simple. It read, "The Elise Room, in memory of Elise Cordova." My mother, the woman whose name had been erased, the woman they had reduced to a suspicious accident, her name was now etched in bronze, a permanent part of the city. The second project was smaller, but it mattered more. The Riverbend Shelter. the one Maria's team had been forced to send scraps to, had never been compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. The original budget for a wheelchair ramp had been indefinitely deferred by Sloan 2 years prior. I approved the expenditure. It cost less than one of Genevieve's chandeliers. I did not send a press release. I did not invite the Gazette. I just went on a cold Friday afternoon. It was not a gala. It was just me, Maria, and the shelter director. We stood on the sidewalk and watched as a resident, an elderly man in a wheelchair, who had not been able to leave the building without assistance in 6 months, rolled himself, slowly, down the new, solid concrete ramp. He stopped at the bottom, on the sidewalk, and just sat there, in the weak winter sun, his eyes closed. That was the work. That was the story. That night, I went back to my apartment. I pulled out a box of simple, cream-colored stationery and a good pen. I wrote 7 handwritten letters. They were not to the donors. They were not to the board. They were to Maria and her 6 kitchen staff, the ones who had been brave enough to walk out onto that marble floor, the ones who had told the truth. I thanked each of them, by name. I told them that their bravery was the foundation of the new trust. I enclosed a check for each of them, a bonus from the trust's operational budget, equal to 3 months of their salary. I put the stamps on myself and walked them to the corner mailbox in the dark. Before I went to bed, I stopped in front of the small, cracked mirror in my bathroom. For 24 years, the face that looked back at me was the long-term guest, a dependent, a shadow, a girl defined by the scraps she was given. I looked at my reflection now. I was still wearing a simple gray t-shirt. I still lived in a 25-square-meter apartment. On the surface, nothing had changed. But everything had. The face looking back was not a dependent. It was not the drawing girl. It was not a victim. It was the face of the person who set the pace, the person who built the dashboards, the person who signed the checks, and named the rooms, and built the ramps. I took a deep breath. For the first time, it did not feel shallow. It did not feel stolen. The rhythm in my chest was not the panicked thrum of anxiety. It was just mine. It was steady. It was the rhythm of the work. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Maya, my lead developer, from our new, larger office space. The public dashboard was stable. The code was clean. The servers were handling the traffic. She said, "Build 1.0 is complete. We did it." I picked up the phone. I smiled at the tired, steady face in the mirror. I called her. "Maya." "Great work," I said, leaning against the doorframe, the quiet of my apartment settling around me. "It is perfect. Now, I have an idea for the next version, build 1.1. I could hear the sound of her keyboard already clicking, the familiar sound of creation. "I want a predictive feature," I said. "I want the dashboard to not just show where the money went. I want it to use the new vendor rules and the project timelines to model where our money is supposed to go next. I want to build an early warning system. I want the algorithm to flag a payment before it becomes a problem." I listened to her excited reply, a stream of technical questions. The work was not over. It was not even close to being over. It was just beginning, and it was all that mattered. The reconstruction of the trust was the slow, grinding work of laying new foundations, brick by brick, line by line of code. The final, formal end of the old regime, however, was swift, sterile, and took place 3 months after the gala, in the beige, high-ceilinged courtroom of the Northbridge Superior Court. The room was packed. Every bench was full. The press, the remaining board members, and half the city's legal community had gathered to watch the formal execution. Genevieve and Sloan were there, seated at the defendant's table. They looked smaller, diminished. The aura of untouchable power that had defined them, that had filled every room they entered, was gone. They were still impeccably dressed in expensive, funereal black suits, but the clothing looked like armor now, a desperate defense rather than a uniform of command. They had hired the most expensive, aggressive lawyer in the state, a man whose entire reputation was built on finding loopholes for the guilty. Their petition was simple. They were contesting the validity of Edmund's will, the one I held. Their claim was that he had been under undue influence from me, the opportunistic adoptee, and that he was not of sound mind. They claimed the second document, the one they had tried to file, the one naming Genevieve as sole trustee, was his true, final, and clear-headed wish. I sat beside Elijah Rowan. I did not speak. I did not need to. My work had been done in the weeks prior. The public dashboard, running live for 90 straight days, had methodically detailed every single recovered dollar, every new project launched. The truth was already being told. 24 hours a day, on servers they could not touch. This hearing was not for the truth. It was for the record. Rowan was not a showman. He did not posture or perform. He simply built a case, brick by brick. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and clear, "we present, as Exhibit A, the original, executed, and videotaped last will and testament of Edmund Vale, dated October 12th, witnessed by 2 independent parties and notarized." The heavy leather-bound document was handed to the clerk. "We present, as Exhibit B, the time-stamped, unedited digital recording of that signing, in which Mr. Vale explicitly, and in sound mind, states his reasoning for naming Ms. Cordova as his successor, citing his fear of what he called the internal rot of the current administration." The clerk marked the small, silver recorder. "And we present, as Exhibit C," Rowan continued, "the full, verified forensic audit from Thorne Accounting, which details the 27 irregular transactions and 14 shell corporations that Mr. Vale was actively investigating at the time of his death, the very rot he was trying to stop. A series of thick, heavy binders, a full foot high, landed on the clerk's desk with a heavy, final thud. The new lawyer for Genevieve and Sloane stood up. He smiled, a thin, dismissive gesture. "Your Honor, this is all fascinating, deeply dramatic theater, but it is, unfortunately, irrelevant. The law is clear. The most recent, validly executed document supersedes all others." He held up a single, thin folder. "We have that document, a final amendment, signed by Mr. Edmund Vale himself, dated just 3 days before his passing. This document," he said, tapping it, "names Genevieve Harrington as the sole trustee. It is the final word." He looked at me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought he had found the one piece of paper that could undo all the data. Judge Alcroft, the same formidable woman who had granted my emergency preservation order 3 months prior, looked at the document. She reviewed it, her face impassive. She looked up at Rowan. "Mr. Rowan," she said, her voice dry, "your opponent raises a valid point. This document appears to be signed by your client's grandfather." Rowan stood. "We do not contest the signature, Your Honor. We contest the validity. I refer the court to the document it currently holds, Exhibit A, the original will." He paused, letting the entire room lean in. "I refer you specifically to Article 4, Section B, the trigger clause." The judge flipped through the thick, original document. The courtroom was silent. We heard the rustle of paper. Her eyes scanned the page. Then she stopped. "Ah," she said. She looked up, over her glasses, at Genevieve's lawyer, her shark. "Counselor," the judge said, her voice suddenly laced with steel, "I am looking at that clause now. It states, and I quote, 'In the event of any and all amendments, codicils, or alterations, made after the primary beneficiary, Eloise Cordova, reaches the age of 28 years, are hereby rendered null and void unless explicitly co-signed and agreed to by the aforementioned beneficiary, Eloise Cordova.'" The shark's smile faltered. It did not just fade, it collapsed. Judge Alcroft continued, her gaze pinning him to the floor. "The court's records confirm Ms. Cordova turned 29 2 months before this amendment was allegedly signed. So, Counselor, I will ask you a simple question. Where is Ms. Cordova's co-signature?" The lawyer stammered. It was a minor procedural clause. Your Honor, it was not deemed. Necessary, given Mr. Vale's clear. It was not deemed necessary, the judge interrupted, her voice rising. Counselor, it is not a suggestion. It is the entire lock on the vault. It was not obtained, which means this document you are holding, she tapped her own copy of their amendment, is not an amendment. It is a piece of wishful thinking. It is legally and profoundly worthless. The verdict came 15 minutes later. It was an annihilation. The court hereby finds the will dated October 12th to be the sole, valid, and binding last testament of Edmund Vale, Judge Alcroft declared, her voice ringing with finality. The subsequent amendment, dated 3 weeks later, is declared null and void. The Bright Harbor Trust and all its assets, properties, and controlling interests are hereby confirmed to be under the full legal control of the successor trustee, Ms. Eloise Cordova. Genevieve let out a small, strangled sound. But the judge was not finished. Furthermore, she continued, looking directly at Genevieve and Sloane, based on the overwhelming and undisputed evidence of gross financial mismanagement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud, this court orders the immediate and full financial restitution of all misappropriated funds, the final sum of which will be determined by the independent auditor. All fraudulent paperwork, contracts, and liens related to the North Docks project are hereby voided. Finally, both Genevieve Harrington and Sloane Vale are permanently banned from serving on the board, or in any fiduciary or signatory capacity, for any charitable foundation registered in the state of Northbridge. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel cracked. It was over. The room exploded. As Rowan and I were ushered out by a smiling bailiff, a hand grabbed my arm. It was Sloane. Her face was a terrifying mask of pale, desperate rage. Her shark lawyer was trying to pull her back, but she was like an animal. "Eloise, wait," she hissed, her voice frantic, her grip like a claw. We can stop this. A civil settlement. We'll pay it. We'll pay it all back. Quietly. We can keep the names out of the press. No more data. We can bury this. It's a family matter. A family matter. The same shield they had used to hide their crimes for 2 decades. I stopped. I looked at her, at the woman who had called me Scraps, who had laughed as her mother assaulted me, who was now begging me to provide the very secrecy that had allowed her to thrive. I pulled my arm from her grip. "No, Sloane," I said, my voice low and cold. "For her alone. There are no more back rooms. There are no more quiet deals. You are correct. You will pay it all back, and you will do it with full, absolute, and painful transparency. The payment will be logged on the public dashboard, as a line item, for every citizen in this city to see. We will watch the money transfer from your frozen accounts back into the community funds. That is the only deal. There is no family. There is only the audit." I left her there, her mouth open, her face shattered. I walked out of the heavy courthouse doors, into a blinding wall of winter sunlight and flashing cameras. The press swarmed, microphones extended. I stood on the top step, the very same steps I had hurried down for 20 years, my head bowed, a shadow trying to be invisible as I followed Genevieve to her car. Today, I stood straight. I did not need a speech. I did not need to perform. I just held up one hand. "I have only one thing to say," I said, my voice clear and strong, carrying over the clicks of the cameras. This was never about a family. It was about a foundation. Today, the court affirmed a simple, powerful truth. No one is Scraps. No one is a long-term guest. The money that belongs to the community will go to the community, and from this day forward, the good names in this city will be proven by good numbers. Thank you. I did not take questions. I pushed through the crowd, Rowan clearing a path. As I slid into the back of his car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an encrypted, unknown number. The philanthropist, the silent donor who had pledged his support at the gala. The message was short. "We saw the verdict. We saw the speech on the steps. We are impressed. The board of my private foundation has just approved a $25 million challenge grant for Bright Harbor. The condition: keep your administrative overhead under 8% for 12 consecutive months. Prove the model is sustainable, and the money is yours. $25 million. A new challenge. A new mountain. I smiled. I typed back one word. Accepted. I told Rowan to drive, not to my apartment, but to the trust headquarters. When you win the war, you do not go to a party. You go back to the work. I did not go to the executive office. I went to the basement. I went to the kitchens. It was late afternoon, and the staff was cleaning up from an internal event, the thank you lunch we had hosted for the volunteers at the new Legal Aid Center. The room smelled of roasted chicken, thyme, and lemon, the same smells that had once defined my humiliation. Maria was there, wiping down a steel counter. She saw me and her face lit up. "CEO, we heard. We all heard. It is good." "It is good, Maria," I agreed. On the counter, I saw her team packing up the surplus food. Not scraps, not cold, congealed leftovers. It was the fresh, perfectly cooked chicken, the untouched trays of roasted vegetables, the pans of fresh bread. I walked over, picked up a stack of sturdy, clean, biodegradable containers, and began to help her. "This is for Riverbend Shelter?" I asked, ladling a generous portion of chicken into a box. "Yes," she said, her voice full of pride. 500 hot meals, fresh, just like Mr. Edmund always wanted. I finished packing a container and sealed the lid. I picked up a black permanent marker that was lying on the counter. On the clean, white lid, I wrote a note. It was not for the shelter. It was not for Maria. It was for the universe. It was for the system. It read, "No scraps, just the next part, in the right place." I placed the container into the delivery box, ready to go. I looked up, my reflection staring back at me from the polished steel of the kitchen wall. "If you have ever had scraps thrown at you," I said quietly, to that reflection, to the memory of the girl at the end of the table. "If you have ever been made to feel like a leftover, keep your fork." I took a deep breath, the good, clean smell of the kitchen filling my lungs. The real climax is not in the humiliation. It is in the moment you stand up, clear the table, and choose the main course. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to connect and share our thoughts. Remember to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.